A few days ago, I was approached by a very good friend of mine, my friend Sonia, and she said to me, Spencer, you have a dog. You can understand what I'm going through. She said, I'm just a wreck. She said, my baby of 15 years, my little girl dog, we've got to put her down. She has really bad arthritis and she's just in so much pain. So, we made the appointment for Friday, and I'm just a complete mess. And I really sympathized with her. I said, Sonia, I'm so sorry to hear that. I know exactly what you're going through. And I know it's really hard, very heartbreaking. So just let me know, what I can do to help. And, what I didn't tell Sonia was, that, what I did go through. It was, for my childhood dog, the dog I had when I was a kid, we had to put him down, Dookie. When I was very little, I think almost as early as I could talk, I started asking my parents for. I really wanted a dog, and my mom was kind of a traditional Greek lady. She couldn't imagine bringing an animal into our house. For her, it was unfathomable. It was not even in the realm of possibility, and she let me know that in no uncertain terms. My dad, I think he could have gone either way. I don't think he really wanted a dog, but I knew at the end it would be her decision. And I just didn't accept no for an answer. Over the years, I just kept asking. I'd bring it up every so often. And I think it was when I was in fifth grade, I think I was 10, I was dead set on convincing her to let me have a dog. And I just didn't relent. I just, for weeks, I just persisted and I begged and I argued and I, wouldn't talk to her, and then I'd be extra nice to whatever. I pulled every trick in the book. And then I think it was just a couple weeks before Christmas. My mom was like filling out her Christmas list for my brother and my sister, my dad and my aunts and uncles, whatever. And when it was mine, I kind of looked over her shoulder and there was just one item on my list and it said dog. And I was like, yes, it worked. So then we kind of shopped around, and I didn't really care what breed of dog we had. I felt like whatever my mom wanted was fine. I just, left it up to her, because I was so grateful that she agreed to getting a dog. So we did. We ended up getting a Bichon Frise, this little white fluffy dog. We named him Dookie. And he was my dog. From the time I was 10 years old, we had him for almost 16 years. And I grew so attached to that dog. He was like the source of my joy, the center of my existence. I'm so grateful that I had Dookie for my childhood. He just added to my childhood. And I just loved him. I loved him to death. And everything was great with him, until maybe, I think he was, a little over 50. He was almost 16 years old. And by this point, I was in my first year of law school. I wasn't living at home. I was living about an hour away. And I would, and he started to fail, physically. He got really sick. He had this illness where he was kind of bleeding internally. So his abdomen was like, it looked like he was really black and blue, but it was actually like the blood inside his system. Like he was like kind of bleeding to death, inside of his system. And we knew, he wasn't gonna last long. So I would visit every so often, just check on him, on weekends and stuff when I was, in law school. And then my mom and dad were going away for a weekend to a wedding. So I knew I had to go home and take care of Dookie. So I think it was the second day I was there, it was a Saturday. And he was just in such bad shape. I mean, he couldn't, forget about walking. He couldn't even lift his head. He just laid there. I couldn't even get him to drink water. And I just said, I can't let him suffer like this another minute. So I called the vet. He was there on a Saturday, and I took him in, and I put him down. That weekend was just awful. I remember, I picked a spot in the backyard. I dug a really, deep grave for him. I didn't bury him until my mom and dad got home. I let them say their goodbyes, but it was absolutely devastating. Again, I was home by myself. I was heartbroken. I just was crying all weekend, and but like everything, you move on, you get over it. I still think about him. Anyway, fast forward, many years later, I got married to my wife Catherine. We had our twins, and Catherine, was adamant, from the time we got married, how much she wanted a dog. Like, oh, we got to get a dog, please, let's get a dog. And I just said, look, especially when the twins came, it was like, We are so overextended. We are maxed out. Like the last thing we could ever manage now is to bring a dog into this house and have to deal with, the responsibilities of owning a dog. Like no way. It's just we can't do it. And it's not like I make all the decisions in the house. I really don't. But that one, I think when you get a dog, if you get a dog, it's really something that both parties have to, both the husband and wife, both parties have to kind of buy into. And she understood that, and at one point I said to her, it's not that I don't like dogs. I love dogs. The problem is I get too attached, and with everything else going on, I can't invest so much of myself into getting an animal now. And I just know I'm going to be attached again. And at some point, I think it was 2020. It was the time when COVID was at its height. Catherine and I both at that point, we were working from home, like everybody was. During COVID, you couldn't go in the office. Nobody went into the office. But I got the sense that like Catherine was not going to be going back into the office. She was going to stay remote indefinitely. And it was the first time I felt like, given that she'll be home with the dog, probably, every day, we probably could swing it. And at one point she said, like, let's just go to the rescue shelter. We'll just check it out. Just you can see how you feel. Maybe, we don't have to get a dog. Let's just go and like check it out. So like, all right, fine. So, we went to, it's called Buddy Dogs. It's about 45 minutes from our house. We went with the kids. And on the way there, she said, if we do get a dog, I definitely want a female dog because they're just easier to manage. I think they, pee in the house less, whatever. And I said, all right, we're not getting a dog today, so it's kind of irrelevant, but okay, yeah. So when we got to the shelter, the lady who ran it, she understood, like, Catherine was kind of like leading the charge. So she took Catherine and the kids into this room where I think they had just gotten three puppies, 2 female and 1 male puppy. They were, brothers and sisters. And she, showed Catherine the girl dogs, and the kids kind of played with them a little bit. And I gotta say, these female dogs were very timid, like almost scared, very low energy, and like didn't really move much, and I felt bad for them. Like you could just tell they were almost like traumatized from whatever happened to them before they got to the shelter. So, while Catherine and the kids were kind of just interacting with the female dogs, I kind of went in the next room and just sat in this chair in this open area where there were, a lot of animals in cages around me. And I just kind of sat there and waited. And then this little dog came, walking out, and he kind of plopped in front of me and like looked at me, and he wanted to play, and I think he put his little paw up and was like poking at me, and I picked him up, and it was kind of like playing with him a little bit, and I kind of just fell in love with him. He was just so cute and just adoring, So anyway, Catherine and the kids kind of finished up, and and she was like, okay, thank you very much. We'll let you know and all that. So we got in the car, we were heading home, and the 2 female dogs, I don't think Catherine and the kids connected with. But I said, that little boy dog, their brother, he was so cute. And I kind of just said, he was so adorable. And Catherine was like, yeah, he really was. So sure enough, long story short, we called the rescue shelter, called them back, and we're like, you guys still open? We want to, take another look at that dog. Is he available? And she was like, yeah, of course. So we went back. His name was Sparky at the shelter. We signed all the papers. We got him, and we brought him home, and we named him Teddy. So Teddy's been our dog ever since. We've had him now for 6 years. And sure enough, I am 100% attached to this dog. I absolutely love him. Just like Dookie, the center of my existence. I work remotely, so Teddy just kind of sits with me, follows me around when I go in, make my lunch. I'm the one who like usually takes him out in the morning and, midday, and I take him out at night. He's my guy, and I'm his guy. So, once again, yes, sure enough, I am just enamored by this dog. And I'll post a picture of Teddy and myself in our backyard up here so you can see what he looks like. And the truth is, I am already starting to worry about the separation anxiety, when that day comes when Teddy passes. Dogs don't last forever. And I do kind of think about it. And I guess you could say, I guess I worry about it a little bit. But what gets me through and makes me, kind of consoles myself is basically what I said to Sonia when I tried to comfort her. I said, for whatever it's worth, I believe with all my heart that someday, in the afterlife, we're going to be reunited with all our loved ones. And that includes our pets. And I also believe that, God does exist. And, God is the embodiment of love. And that the birth of an animal, just like the birth of a baby, is a miracle that's performed by our Creator. And I also believe that, the love that we have for our pets here on earth, that's blessed by God and is eternal. And that, God's creatures are someday, including our pets, are going to be part of God's eternal kingdom. The reality is, we know so little about, what happens to us after we die. The Bible really doesn't talk about that. And it certainly wasn't in Jesus' message. Exactly what happens to us, when we enter the afterlife. Like, are we kind of flying around with wings and harps and little halos? Probably not. But, we don't know fully, like, what form we take. Even things like, the process that we undergo here on earth about growth and evolution and maturing and becoming more godlike and becoming more, sort of better versions of ourselves. Does that continue after we die? Or, is it like the day we die, we're like fully baked? Like that evolutionary process ends. We're fully baked like a cake coming out of the oven. We don't know. Again, there's so little we know about the next life. So, let's not pretend otherwise. But the one thing I do know, and that is, someday when, Jesus calls me home and I enter God's kingdom, my guys are going to be there. I know they're going to be there. And that includes, Dookie and Teddy and my cat Felix, and even our family guinea pig Calvin, because, I love Calvin too. So before I close, if you want to hear more from me, please do hit the subscribe button. And I would love it if you drop me a comment. I'd love to hear what you think about all this. And we'll see you next time.